First of all, let me welcome Professor Paramjit Singh Judge, the former president of Indian Sociological Society, and also the former managing editor of Sociological Bulletin, the journal run by Indian Sociological Society, which has international standing and is being published by Sage International. Professor Judge has been a prolific writer, not only writing in sociology, but also has been writing novels, which is also part of creative writing. And the kind of narratives which he has developed through his popular writing in novels. Now, once you start reading that, now the reading itself starts developing a visual before your eyes. And therefore, what it therefore implies is that visuals and writing, they go side by side, because any expression in writing, whether in the form of a poem or visual as a painting or visual as a mural or a statue or sculpture, whatever it is, no, it reflects upon certain peculiar things, not only about the individual who's creating it, and not about the object alone, which is being created by the creator, but it also connects with the society and the ground realities. Sometimes we may not be in a position to interpret things in a right way, but most of the times the reality is being reflected in the visual expressions. And the purpose of inviting Professor Judge to this ad hoc group of visual sociology, that is because recently, a couple of months back, his book came on folk music, and that was titled as Culture and Popular Music. Now, this popular music is not, I mean, maybe in a particular language, but it has a pan India kind of impact. And it, it in fact tries to give us a broader picture of how the music, human emotions, culture, and the society, they are interlinked. Rather, they are the expressions of each other. Like when Redcliffe Brown was talking about culture and structure, so he says structure is culture and culture is structure. So similarly, when we are talking about the popular music, now popular music also represents the society. It presents certain kind of nuances of the society, and therefore tries to develop a link between human thinking and the way of life people live. So, not going much into describing about Professor Paramjit and his works, we would rather like to hear him more than speaking. Secondly, I would also like to mention here uh, my colleague and co-convenor, Professor Diwakar, Vaishali, and in fact, she has been taking a very proactive, uh, role in organizing these talks. And in fact, she was the one who first organized in August, and now we are having it as a second most important event of ad hoc visual sociology. So now I would like uh, Ankita ji to please start the proceedings.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ankita Chatterjee. This is the second event organized by the Adhoc Group for Visual Sociology of the Indian Sociological Society. The successful organization of this talk owes much to the initiative and coordination of Professor Satish Sharma, convener, and Professor Vaishali Diwakar, co-convenor of the group. The topic for today's session is From Akharha to Videography, Changing Contours of Musical Performance in Punjab. I'm honored to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Paramjit Judge, former president of the Indian Sociological Society. He had taught at Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, and his areas of expertise include social movements, social exclusion, and sociology of Punjabi culture. He's the managing editor of the well-known journal Sociological Bulletin and a prolific scholar. He has made significant contributions to understanding how migration and transnationalism reshape cultural identities and social relations within and beyond Punjab. His academic engagements have been supported by the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, NRI Sabha Punjab, and the British Commonwealth, enabling him to deliver lectures across Canada, England, and the United States. He has authored many books and published in numerous journals, articles, and with great pleasure, I now invite Professor Paramjit Judge to share his reflections with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ankita. Let me start. Professor Satish Sharma, Professor Vaishali Diwakar. Let me begin by saying that that is me and Professor Satish Sharma, we started our academic journey together from Punjab University, Chandigarh. So we have been together for the last, how many years? Almost 50 years. Both as students, researchers, and then as colleagues. What I'm going to do is basically what happened was during COVID, I was free, so I started taking interest in Punjabi music, and then it led me to do all these things which I am now, presenting for you. Book came out. I am also taking the help of another work almost published around that same time when my book was published, that is by Radhika Kapuria on Punjabi music. What I am going to talk about is not how the people create visuals, that maybe when they hear music. I'm going to talk about the performers and audience, essentially involving music, not outside the musical thing, but whatever is the case, I'll focus on that. So if I start with that, and I'll confine myself to Punjab, but again, some comparison may be made when I'm speaking. I cannot go back to beyond, rather, let us say, about 19th century. I will refer one thing only, and then I'll confine myself to 20th century. Now, it is generally believed that Punjabi music is what it is now popular by way of the various great singers who have become popular all over the world, largely through Punjabi diaspora, but also otherwise all over India, where there is no Punjabi diaspora. It is there. I have so many stories to tell about it. But if we go back to the times when there was no videography, there was no online availability of the audience or the singers, we go back to the times when there was not even DJ or loudspeakers. It was only the singers and the people. From there, I would start. Now, in Punjab, the whole question of entertainment, particularly through music, was also strongly linked with the class and caste, of caste system of Punjab. There were specific castes who were singers in the 19th century. But it doesn't mean that all of these singers were from the lower caste, but mainly the singers who would go to the people and sing, they were largely from the lower caste. And that particular caste was what we call it Marasi caste. If they were Hindus, they were called Dumnas or Doms, but all the Marasis were Muslims. And they just exclude folk singing because I'm not talking about it. They were the performers, but the occasion to perform were very, very specific. This is one category. This used to be through what we call it Ras, the traditional Punjabi Notanki system in which they would perform. And second category of the singers were related to the religious fairs, religion, in a way that on specific occasions or on specific days, a set of people, largely belonging to the lower caste, would go from house to house and sing and beg. This was one particular category. There was another category of singing and performing where audience was involved, and it was for the privileged few what we call it kotas. And kotas generally were in the urban centers, and most of the dancers and singers in these kotas also belong to particular caste of Punjab, known as Kanjars. All the Kanjars of Punjab were Muslims, and even now, and the singing and music, which was combined among these mujras, called mujras, were in kotas, were mujras, and they used to do that. This was I'll also talk about the process through which this would come. But there was another thing whose roots are in the 19th century, and this is a unique feature. That was called classical singing. Punjab has two major classical gharanas. One was called Patiala Gharana, and most of you might be knowing about Patiala as a city. And the second was Sham Churasi Gharana. These were two places which were centers of classical music and singing. And in 19th century, in Punjab, there began what we call it Harballabh Fair, Harballabh Ka Mela in Jalandhar. And from then on, this is going on. That classical music, every year towards the end of December, people go to that place and hear the classical music. But classical music, most of the times, was monopolized two categories of people. One was Muslims and the other was Hindu Brahmins. Brahmins were a large number of classical singers. So it was a very specialized kind of a singing, but this was confined to certain specific situations and what we call it. But I will focus more on the other kind of thing. Now, when we talk about Marasis, even in the early 20th century, when no innovation took place, starting from, then the major form of, musical performances used to be what we call it Natankis, and in Punjab it is called Ras. Ras used to have two components. One was called Dankla and the other was called the theatre or play. Nakla could be some humorous elements of some exchange of dialogues, but that also included singing and dancing. Most of the singers and dancers, the artists, they largely belong to the lower caste. Later on, some men, all men, disguised as women also, but they all belonged to the lower caste. This was not upper caste, and the dominant caste were not part of it. And they used to move from one place to another, sometimes patronized by some big landowners, and they would do it. Whatever money they were getting was largely through what people used to give them, shower on them by way of enjoyment and all that, being happy that okay, take this much of money or whatever it was. And that particular tradition of Nakla or Ras, this also was part of some religious fairs. I remember in village Sari in Sharpur district, during the Holi period celebrations, there used to be Ras and Nakla every evening, and it used to be an affair lasting for 4 or 5 days. So this continued from the 19th century in this village, and same is the case with that. But then there is no understanding who were part of it. We don't know much about the caste background, but they were largely from different walks of life. In the Malwa belt of Punjab, there was a tradition. The tradition was that on fairs, the Akharhas were organized. It largely started in Malwa belt. And these Akharhas were again during fairs. Some kind of thing is going on. Nothing. It is not important whether it was religious or otherwise, but they were largely religious. And there it is a kind of stage which would be set, and then people would perform. Here, the first form of singing which used to take place would be in the form of competition. Who would win? And it was also, locally it was called Kabit. Kabit is the forerunner of the 20th century Quishri, which would come late. It didn't have any music, and the people who were singing, they were also the poets, and they would sing, and the Kabit, a form of poetry, poem, and they used to do that, and this was kind of an annual affair. In addition to that, what would happen is that this largely started happening a little later in the 20th century. But one thing, let me explain it because I will miss otherwise. Most of such organizations, except for fairs in the daytime, would be in the night. And the Tanki, Ras, Nakla generally used to be in the night. The reason was that you cannot magnify the sound, the voice. Therefore, in the night time, it used to be very calm, silence, and then their voice could reach the audience far much better than otherwise. At the same time, we should also think that the population was not very large number of people would be coming, but whosoever used to come, they could hear what they were singing. This was one thing which we have to remember. But the organization of Kabit used to happen in the daytime, and it continued even after the independence. I am not aware whether it is now, but it continued even after independence. Now, one thing which happened in this kind of singing was that the kothas also sometimes moved to the villages because there were rich landowners. They would give money and they would bring Kanjariya, we used to call the singers and dancers at their residences, and they would pay money and do it. Generally, it used to be done at the time of marriage. I will not talk about folk singing and music because it has a very different, because there is no audience in sometimes in folk music, particularly at the time of marriage. Everybody is participant, everybody is audience. So therefore, it is a very different situation. Let us keep it away. But what would happen is that this movement from the kotha to the public in general was something which would happen. Then there was another spectacle which would happen, and it is very interesting. It was that on specific days, men would be dancing on the grave of Sufi Pir. And the form of dance which they used to perform was what we now call women's dance as Gidda in Punjab. Generally, it was done by the devotees of the Sufi Pir at his graveyard or mazar. This continued for a fairly long time. And then in the 20th century, one major development took place in singing and all that. That was that there was a rise of religious identities in Punjab. And it started happening in the 19th century after the British did colonialism and the census and started enumerating people and their religious identities. And all the religious communities in Punjab, Muslims through Anjumans, and among the Hindus, Arya Samaj movement started, and then the Sikhs also started their Sikh Sabha. And Sikh Sabha focused on some kind of Puritanism after the joining of Tat Khalsa, what we call it, the pure Khalsa in the late 19th century. And then, we have a different kind of situation in which the birth of the Guru, birthday of the Gurus being celebrated. And when they were celebrated, then there were other occasions. Now, it is here that another form of singing started, which used to draw a large audience. That was, it was something related with Sikh history, but it was not exactly Sikh history. It was also what we call it, the constructed history of the Sikhs through singing. And so we have music, what we call it, taddis. These singers were taddis, and obviously, generally it was tadd sangi. These two musical instruments started occurring, were being used during this particular period. Then another form which took a serious shape in the 20th century, particularly when the first half of the 20th century was coming to close, then it became very dominant form. It was called Vishri. Vishri was also a form of singing in which there was no, what we call it, musical instrument involved. It was a kind of group singing in which one was the leader who would main this thing, and then the other would follow him when he would complete. It was kind of thing. And then 2-3 major figures evolved, in 1930s and particularly in 1940s, and they continued. One of them was Rajabali. Rajabali transformed the very nature of Kavishri singing, and he was also a government employee and also a singer with his troupe, and he used to sing, and he also used to write. This was another very interesting thing. That's why it was a kind of evolved from the earlier Kavit singing, which was also not very religious, but same was the case with Kavishri, in which, the singer could use historical elements, could use some love stories. Hiranja could use some other story of what we call it, social bandits. If we remember what the famous historian Erkbaum talks about social bandits. So they would do it. So along with Rajabali, we have another major singer, Sont Singh Seetal, and then came what we call Karnail Singh Paris, and then ultimately Joga Singh Joga. These four are very prominent, where there were large number of this thing. But the person who set the standard for Kavishri singing was Rajabali, and he was able to write what we call it 72 couplets, which were to be sung continuously. No, I cannot explain the technical terms because that is not the purpose, but it used to draw a lot of audience. And in 1947, Rajabali left for Pakistani Punjab, and then the stage was taken over by Sont Singh Seetal, Karnail Singh Paris, and Joga Singh Joga, and many others, but these people became more famous. But the major development which took place was what we call it akhadas. Akhadas, developed more and more in terms of popular entertainment after particularly 1950, because some of the inventions had occurred. And but the structure of this akhada was might have been very common with such other places. One may say that roughly one can translate it as a kind of a stage, because the word akhada has many meanings. The word akhada was first used by Naga sadhus, and Naga sadhus used akhada in terms of the place where they used to train in weapons. They used to practice and all that. And then the akhada has been used by Nihangs of Punjab using almost similar weapons, and also it has the same connotation. But when we move from this tradition to this particular singing tradition, then akhada would be a place where, similar to the local ras kind of a thing, where audience is almost surrounding that particular akhada. We call it stage, which is a little bit raised platform, and then there would be some place left for others to for the artists to move, and this became very, very popular. And after independence, within 20 years, some of the developments which took place in Punjab also transformed many things. One was that we now magnify the sound. We had loudspeakers which could be used, and then the khada, but the khadas continued in one way or the other, in the sense that the format was the same till 1980s, except for some specific occasions which modern stage was used. And the transformation which came in 1970s, particularly about this kind of nature of this audience, was in terms of what we call it, that the diaspora started inviting them. But no, let us understand one thing, that in 19th century and the earlier period, the people who were singers and who used to sing, nobody remembered them, because they could only be talked about in conversation. Some would remain in memory for 20 years, 30 years, and they would be forgotten. But then we have a new situation which happened, in which their voice could be recorded. We had those records, and their sound could be magnified, though, so that it could reach large audience, and more people could come, which also meant some more money for the singers. Now, the earlier the mode of what we call it singing, earning the money, was something which was very, very different. In 1960s, the phenomenon which happened for the singers, particularly who became very prominent, who were liked by large number of people, they would be booked. They would be, contacted, and then the date would be fixed. In most of the cases, the rich and powerful, they would ask them to perform during the marriage of their son or somebody, so on some occasions. But one very important occasion in Punjab, which generally is not celebrated in the rest of the country the way it is celebrated in Punjab, is Lodi. And Lodi could be one occasion where the family which has been blessed by his son. Remember that we are still living in patriarchal families where son is preferred. So they could finance this kind of thing. They could give money and invite these people to sing. And what happened in late 60s, particularly, that it also changed in the way the singers were there. Two transformations took place. One was, one was that other caste people started joining it, the relatively higher in status, not the highermost or uppermost. This was one thing which happened. Second was that women singers also started coming up. And it happened because some of the women singers, their songs were recorded in early 1950s, and then followed by two major singers of Punjab, Prakash Kaur and Surinder Kaur, and in late 60s, many others joined. I'll talk about the content a little later on. But so what happened that the reason that the women could come from the upper caste, because Prakash Kaur and Surinder Kaur, they belong to what we call it Khatri caste, which is very high caste in hierarchy. Depending upon how you view it in terms of Varna system, but Varna system we know are just broad classification how a caste. So among the Khatris, it is believed that they are Kshatriyas, and there is a story. Somebody say no, they are Baniyas. All these things. Let us forget about them. But they are upper caste in the ideal typical sense of the caste hierarchy. You can say that they belong to twice born caste and quite second in number ideally, because basically, let us remember, Punjab doesn't have any status, any high status of our Brahmins. This is something which is recorded because Brahmins were not landowners in Punjab. They were not as powerful as they were in UP, Bihar, and or Janmis in Kerala. No. So because of that, they did not have the kind of status, but they still controlled the ideology. The difference was that Punjab was not a state where Vaishnavism was strong. It was Shaivism which was strong. In fact, Vaishnavism became was popularized in the early, let us say, 19th century, early 19th century, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh invited some Brahmins from Rajasthan. There is some reference to it, but I cannot say I have a strong evidence to say that Maharaja Ranjit Singh. But Vaishnavism never became very popular. So therefore, Brahmins could not occupy the kind of status which they have had in other states, particularly in other Hindi-speaking states. So what happened that with the coming of Prakash Kaur and Surinder Kaur singing, they could only sing because they could not sing in public in the beginning because they were too high for their caste pride, their family's caste pride. But radio became the medium through which they were singing. But radio doesn't have the kind of audience. You don't have visuals. You can only have visual by listening to song on radio, which was also owned by very few people. If you have already experienced that this is what they were talking about. Otherwise, they became very popular. But in the late 60s, they started also performing on stage, particularly Surinder Kaur was more, modern in terms of her outlook, as well as she was more popular. And then she and Rasa Singh Mastana were perhaps among the first to make a couple. So men and women going to akhadas to sing became the norm. And the structure of akhadas remained the same. Now, what the difference was that we have loudspeaker. We don't have yet music system and DJs, but this is how it happened. And it continued till 1980s. Now, the reason was that the kind of music system which was, used for singing, and it was sufficient for the what we call it for the loudspeaker. It didn't have there was no concept of orchestra that you have so many musicians sitting and creating a tune. It was not like this. It did not have a large number of people involved in the production of a particular song. And particular song could be sung only on radio. But if you want, then you needed a record, LPs and all those things, and for which you needed more songs. So whatever was the case, that even these recorded songs and then the loudspeakers, they were very elementary in terms of the nature of music. It was not orchestra, so therefore it was easy. Because of that, it was also easy for the singers to move from one place by taking 10 or 6, 7 people, and they would charge some money and perform. Because radio was not sufficient to, to help them to earn or survive. They hardly used to give some money. Even if their songs were recorded by various companies as Master's Voice and others, they would not give much money. And you have no poet who would write the songs, then you would have musicians, then you have singers. So in this kind of a complex situation, even till 1980s, 80s, the singing was, in fact, before this kind of stage performance, which we call it Akharha performances, it was largely the hobby and having a name. They became household name. Radio was used by these singers as a medium so that they could be invited by others to sing, to perform live, but we now call it live performance. And in this process, what happened that akhadas became a norm in Punjab. More and more people would start, would invite them, but all people didn't have money. There were very limited number of people. Sometimes some organization, sometimes the government would do it. For example, diaspora at one point of time invited Asa Singh Mastana and Surinder Kaur, and they went to England. This started also happening in early 1970s. So this is how the things occurred. Then came the 1990. And 1990, I am using it as a watershed because from 1990s, the Punjabi music changed and the audience also changed in many ways, or it transformed. Now, what happened that we have strong introduction of what we call it pop music. This should be understood in terms of what was happening in England, particularly. In England, by that time, it almost became a norm to have musical concerts in which orchestra was used. And in 1980s, there were a large number of Punjabi diaspora who also had grown-up sons and daughters whose taste was not exactly the traditional classical Indian kind of singing. So they were more interested in, at that time, Western singing. And that was the time when Apache Indian kind of stereo nations, they started having what we call it fusion music. And fusion music, it was not confined to just video, what we now call it audio cassettes, but they also performed live on stages. And their performances became very, very popular in this thing. In 1980s, this was the norm. I have attended, when I was in England, many such performances at different places. So the change which came to Punjabi music came from Punjabi diaspora. Punjab was not ready. So the first to transform the very meaning of singing, it took place in the another great contributor to the change was television. We may say that 1980 television became common, but its real impact started in sometimes in late 1980s. But more serious impact started when the dish TV came, and then there were specialized channels in which they could show. Now we have no different kind of audience which is not interconnected, but they could watch on television their performances. They could not record it, though. They could have video players at that time, but the concept that video cassettes could be used, that comes very late in 1990s. And so the first to draw audience in England was Malkiyat Singh. And Malkiyat Singh sang two songs which became very, very popular. And he performed it on stage. And then the televisions started, telecasting it. One was what we call it. The first one was Gud Nalo Ishq Mittha, Rabba Lagna Kise Nu Jave. And the second was what we call it, Tutak Tutak Dutiyan. And around this time, a young boy who belongs to my neighboring village, his father had migrated to Patna Sahib to perform Gurbani. His eldest son, started, his first song. I don't remember his first song, but I think his name was Daler Mehndi. Daler Mehndi again entered the pop singing, and he was enabled by the television. That how he could be seen dancing. Now, both Malkit Singh and Daler Mehndi, they were not only singers who could be watched on television, and then you could have record them on video recorder, but they were also very good dancers. They could dance. One great qualities of Malkit Singh was that when he was in India, he was a great Bhangra dancer. But Daler Mehndi doesn't have that kind of history, but he also learned dance very well, and his dance form was not exactly Punjabi. It was also fusion, some kind of Hindi music kind of a thing, and then some steps and some actions, and his gestures were not exactly part of the traditional Punjabi dance, whereas Malkit Singh's were. Now, what happened? But that became instantly popular. Here, let me add one thing so that we also understand why Punjabi music became very popular in India. Punjabi, Hindi, and Urdu. All these three languages have common grammar. Only words may differ. So, therefore, anybody who knows Hindi or Urdu can make sense of what Punjabi song is. So, anyway, this is how it started happening, and it continued till the first decade of 21st century. But then came something. It is always the way the things transform, because before the coming of Malkit Singh and Daler Mehndi in succession, Punjabi singers could make money, as we know the case of Gurdas Maan was very popular. Then Chamkila was on whose movie has been made. He was among the most popular. But both of them were part of the Akharha tradition. But when these people come, Akharha has disappeared. Stage has come up on which there is audience only on one side, and they could charge money. No, once the audience became large, the performance was not simply confined to these people singing, but it also was in a kind of multi-trajectory kind of entertainment, in the sense they would have some comedians with them. They would have some, other singers who would sing in between to give them rest. And the time of the show would be much longer than it used to be earlier. So in that process, 1990s shaped all these things. But no, with this kind of thing, the economy of the music also changed. No, you have large orchestra. If you have large orchestra, you have to pay more money, which means that you have to charge more money. And then you have to keep the, all records of where they would go and all that. As a result of which they had to have managers. So there were managers for each kind of singers. Slowly, these managers became entrepreneurs. They, in the first decade of 20th century, all these managers, some of them who became rich, they were the go-between the singer and the people who were organizing. They started opening their own, what we call it, companies. And they started sponsoring singers. This happened in the first decade of 20th century. And then suddenly, they also started deciding whom to promote, whom not to promote. And it also made some singers, frustrated. They would also pay less to the new singers and kind of thing. Now, one phenomenon which happened, it happened earlier, but it like Gurdas Maan, Prakash Kaur and all that. But Gurdas Maan is a classical example. There were others, but from Gurdas Maan, the participation of a particular caste, that is Jat caste, Jat Sikh caste from Punjab, in singing started in a very, very strong way. This caste has certain characteristics. And the most enabling factor in the case of Jats is their land ownership. Now, in the first decade of the 21st century, some of the singers, some of the young boys who could sing but who were not allowed because now the market was controlled by some these companies. So they had some problems. How would they go about it? They would go to the Doordarshan, they would try their best and all that. But then came the internet. And with the internet came the YouTube. Now, when the YouTube came, some of these aspiring singers were not dependent on these companies sometimes. They only had to spend money. And when they could spend money, they could create a video and put it on the YouTube. Now, here another kind of thing happened in Punjabi music. That is the entry of mafia in happened. YouTube has a very simple rule. If how many likes you have, the money would be determined by that kind of number of likes, number of people who watched your video, and because if the video is watched more and it has more likes, then the singer would get more money. So in the process, so around that time, the average amount of money which was spent without hiring women dancers at that time, it used to be about 5 to 10 lakh rupees, and then came a great stress on some of these singers. I know one professor of Punjabi, his son is good singer, but his father could spend money to help him to make video, but otherwise he became accessible. But what happened was that the first mafia which developed was that they would have an agreement with the singer that, look here, we will give you so many likes and you give us half the money which you have earned. And what they would do is that they would start liking the same video by using through different IP addresses and also telling others like it, you will find it interesting and all that. And they would charge money. One of the singers did not give them the money. He was shot, and he was shot in the leg, not otherwise. And so this was also started happening much before when serious issues came in music. But then, because of the diaspora impact, more and more singers from diaspora came, and some of them became very important in the beginning, like Ellie Mangat was one in Canada, and England I have already talked about. So then came Sidhu Moosewala in Canada, that is very recent one. And so what happened that this process of using videography and YouTube started generating capital which was much beyond their imagination. And when a lot of money came, then also the mafia came. Now here is something which happened. Now when the videography came, then the most important thing is that video itself becomes very, very interesting. One aspect of video is that video is expected to be thematic representation of the content of the song. This was one thing which was very important because this is how it should be. But then it should also incite people. It should also make it, so they started sensualizing it. So then, the dancers came up. And when the dancers came, we have all kinds of, dancers and then half-naked bodies. It started occurring. And virtually all the singers, with the exception of one singer, that is Sidhu Moosewala, most of them, they used what we call it, these half-naked singer. Earlier songs, one song of Sidhu Moosewala perhaps has it, but that was very early. After that, he did not use. Now, last thing which is very important, because many people think that Punjabi music is become, they are also erotic and dirty. They don't understand that the roots in this kind of erotic and dirty music is kotha. Kothas have come to an end, but the songs remain. Large number of erotic songs come from two sources in Punjab. One is this kotha, which has tradition, though has terminated, but songs continued. Another is folk song, particularly women's folk dance song. It has a lot of erotic element, but unfortunately, most of the recorders of folk, songs do not include it because they think, why should we represent Punjab in such a way? But it is something natural. The second tradition, which was of violence, it came from the way the earlier Veer Ras, what we call it, Gaddis used to sing or Kvishers used to sing. Or these two used to sing Kvishri or songs, which had a lot of violence. The Kvishers also glorified social bandits like Sucha Surma, Juna Maud, which are very well known in Punjab, particularly the Malabar belt. Similarly, Sikh history, in which Sikh wars, Sikh struggles, which are full of wars and violence. So and not only that, one of the cultural formats of representation in Punjab was two, particularly what we call it, romantic ballads. I'll not talk about much on these, but I should mention that one is what we call it Hi Ranja, the other is what we call it Mirza Sahiba. Now, Mirza's story is very similar to what Lorca wrote in Bloody Wedding, his play. That is, Mirza is killed and he dies fighting the brothers of Sahiba, but brothers kill him and Sahiba both, their sister also. Whereas Ranja doesn't do it. Ranja has a divine blessing and then he gets healed, but then his uncle kills her and he dies of shock. These are two very different stories. On the other hand, Ranja is a Muslim. He becomes a Hindu yogi in the Gorkhanath tradition and then goes to his in-laws. So that kind of a story, that in both the cases, the characters die. Therefore, the singing which happened had both these elements for singing. So on the one hand, we have Mirza image, then it also joined by Surma, Sucha Surma, Juna Maud, and then the Sikh wars and all that Veeras. All this combined created a kind of Punjabi narrative in which violence was glorified. So when we talk about Mirza, we talk about bow and arrow and mere. And when we talk about modern hero, we talk about gun and endeavor, let us say. And when we come to Ranja, Ranja is something which got transformed into a very different thing in Punjabi culture. In the 17th century, there was a Sufi poet called Shah Hassan. Shah Hassan was the first who glorified Ranja into God. And in the 18th century, when Bulle Shah comes, Ranja is something when he in fact becomes God, like Haji Lok Makke nu jande, asi jana takht hazare, jitwal yar usse wal Kaaba, pame pol kitaba chare. Now, what happened that, so the kind of songs which particularly men and women sang, they corresponded to these two main motifs, these two particular things. And the videography also reflected on this. Now we have large number of songs sung by men in which the protagonist is a woman. And it is also part of its tradition. It is not only the part of the Islamic tradition in which the Sufi poet Farid say that Kali Koil tu Kitgun Kali, मैं अपने प्रीतम के बिरहा जाली. It is not only the Muslim Sufi tradition in which man presents himself to a woman in relation to God. It is also a tradition in Hinduism, like Chaitanya. And eroticism is not simply confined to what we call it kotas. Eroticism is also part of our religious tradition. If anybody would like to read Gita Govind by Pandit Jayadev Goswami. It is nothing but the kind of, and it is stated that please read it, it will give you moksha. This is in the introduction. So what happened that in Punjabi singing, the trajectory of development which took place was along these lines, and it became very, very important. Very videography hardly showed anything related to what we call it the contemporary issues, particularly women. Because if you say that you are a woman in relation to God, you have also condemned woman to the eternal hell. Because so in the way all this thing was made, it was something which reinforced the woman to a highly subordinate position. And perhaps very few songs, like Sidhu Moosewala talking about, Jatti June Mord di Baduk Vargi, Dekh Bariyan de Saah Sukde. He talks about a woman as a warrior, which again he draws from Sikh history. But anyway, he talks about a woman with some kind of empowerment. Otherwise, the moment you look at the women singers singing like Jasmine Sandler's singing, Nain ne sharaab di do botla, ina botla nu sip pive. No, she presents herself as desirable to man. Similarly, the men who some of the songs the men have sung, they resemble the kind of Sufi tradition in which the man presents woman, protagonist is woman. There is some kind of subjugation. Woman is not an assertion in these videographies. Hardly. If either she is an object of sexual desire, showing her bodies. So videography, in fact, in many ways, reinforce the image of woman. If the woman is shown in even women's songs, she is like, gold digger, large number of songs. I won't talk about kind of thing. Now, the last thing, let me tell you, because I wanted to share with you one of the thing, my experience, little story, I'll end with that. I was in Dibrugarh for some work, that is for NAC work. So I was in one car, which was hired by the college, and the driver started Punjabi music. I thought he is doing it because he comes to know that I am from Punjab, so I would love. So many songs I was listening to. Then suddenly I asked, because you don't hear Moosewala? No, sir, he is our favorite. My brother did not eat food for 2 days when he came to know about the murder of Sidhu Moosewala. No, so I am giving this example as a personal story because that Punjabi music ultimately through all this has reached beyond boundaries of Punjab. Obviously, Punjabi diaspora is one thing, but the nature of performance and the amount of money has a very tragic aspect also, particularly in the videography, particularly in the very economy of song in which mafia has entered and it continues to enter. With these words, I stop. Thank you very much for inviting me, both Professor Satish Sharma and Professor Vaishali Diwakar. I think I stop here. Thank you. I have one question from Ipsita Pradhan. Could you throw some light on the nature of the lyrics of these songs? I think I have talked about little, but largely my last part was on the very kind of the nature of lyrics, that kind of songs we have. you know, um, very few songs which I would say speak about contemporary issues. It is not that I have listened to every song. One is by Sidhu Moosewala. The title of the song is 295. It has visuals in the background, doesn't have clear visuals, but 295, according to earlier IPC, was that if you heart religious sentiments, then this particular thing is was applied to the against those. This is some one song which talks about the content, but largely the content I have talked about largely about it. The romantic, obviously romantic songs always dominate in the society, but romantic songs also have sometimes their beauty in the sense that the one thing about which I now cannot talk about is that how the metaphors and symbols are used in these songs. So that's why I have covered it. There is another Sanjay has asked me about how far akhadas did play a role in political power. Earlier, it was not the case. But when the akhadas became more and more popular, then the political leaders also started organizing it. The first I could remember in 1960s was the public relations department used to organize cultural programs in villages. At that time, the most important thing was family planning. But then later on, it remained marriage and other issues. But then it also happened that if some sastha or organization invites some singer, they would also invite some politicians. It was in that way that these akhadas were used, but that was earlier. At that time, the politicians were a little different. They never tried to use it much. We know one politician who was also, I think, a great singer. That is Muhammad Sadiq. Muhammad Sadiq himself was a great singer. He also became a politician, but that is a different story. Uh, but otherwise, they were not exactly the political platforms in the earlier period because the political platforms to set stages and all that started on religious occasions in Punjab, particularly the Sikh religious occasions, specific occasions. There were days where all political parties would come and set up there. But that is the more recent one. I don't know when it started. But the Akhada as cultural, kind of a performance, it didn't have that kind of a thing. This is to my mind. But I think it is very important. It should be explored also now. And that's all I can say.
Hello, sir. Thank you. I think it was a wonderful talk. So I have this question, like you spoke about the change of music, that how it went from traditional music, then the coming of television, radio, then the coming of television, it became more visual. Right now we have videos on YouTube, and it's just a personal thing, like you have gone in depth into understanding the economy of the songs and especially talking about folklores like Ranja, Bulisha, and all of them. And recently, I've been hearing a lot of songs, Folk Studio Pakistan 15, which has come out even in India. And I see the kind of comments where these lyrics are actually shared, and so there's a trans-border or transnational like connection if you see that. So that is also very interesting to understand that how some of the videos actually cross borders, like you said, with diasporic studies and all that, some of the videos can really interconnect people even beyond borders. So that was interesting to hear. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Pakistan is something. Please
Mm,
remember one thing. As Punjabis, we share more with the Punjab of Pakistani part. Pakistan's Punjab and our Punjab, we share a lot with each other. We should remember it because we have the same cultural heritage. Only difference is there. And so some of the songs, Bulle Shah is not part of folklore. Bulle Shah was a Sufi poet. He was a poet. And you may be knowing that famous song, Chaya, Chaya, Chaya. Basically the word Chaya, Chaya is taken from Bulle Shah's in the modified form from Thaya, Thaya. Tere ishq nachaya kar Thaya, Thaya. No, that is always there. That with the Pakistani songs, in fact, in Punjab, Indian Punjab, Pakistani songs were very popular and they were always liked. Even if you ask me that which song you particularly like, who is for you the greatest singer, I always say that is Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. He is for me the greatest singer in Punjabi when he was alive. And now Hadika Kyani has sung Buhe Bariyan. It is unbelievably a great song. So that way, and also has philosophical depth, which many popular singers songs don't have. So Pakistani song, and let me tell you a very interesting thing. There was one journalist who used to criticize Moosewala a lot, and last year he went to Pakistan to a Gurdwara along with the Gurdwara Sangat. And the young boys of Pakistan, they asked him, why are you criticizing Moosewala? You can very well imagine that even there, that kind of, impact was there. That why did you criticize Moosewala? By this time, he was gone. Last year ki baat hai. So, one you can very well, in Punjab, we are equally familiar with Pakistani singers, particularly. When I talk about Mujra, it comes to my mind some of the Mujras. Basically, these are all Pakistani recording. And when you look at Coke Studio, I think at the Indian conference, Sociological conference, if both Professor Satish Sharma and Professor Vaishali allow me, I will talk about that how the cultural songs are transformed into popular songs. Take example, Arif Lahar and Misha Shafi's Jugni. Now, Jugni is a cultural song, but now Coke Studio has taken over it. But Coke Studio has not taken over, is like Pasudi. Pasudi is a song and many some other songs. But there are many songs which have been very popular as part of the people, may not necessarily be folk. Please, folk is very different. And then you come out with this. For example, मैं तेनू समझावां कि नहीं तेरे बिन लगदा जी. I think it is Humpty Sharma or Badri Sharma ki Dulaniya. This particular song is also sung by Hadika Kyani, part of it, in a different thing. In particular Pakistani show that was different episodes, one that is Udan. In Udan it is shown. So we share it. We have been singing, and also we have been using, and they also are using us some of the things. But in certain respects, they are more creative than us in certain sense. And in fact, the Pakistani songs have much better meaning sometimes than these songs like Buhe Bariyan. He says that आसमानों पर उड़ते पक्षी देखो क्या क्या करते, ना वो करते रिज्क ज़खीरा, ना वो भूखे मरते, इंसान करते रिज्क ज़खीरा, इंसान भूखे मरते. I am translating immediately. Okay, we the humans, we store food and we die of hunger, but the birds don't die of hunger. Look at the very metaphor, the way this song Buhe Bariyan has explained it. Sometimes we lack such depth in Punjabi songs, in Punjab, Indian Punjab.
Yes, sir. So there is another question for you. Hello, sir. Could you please suggest a reading if I wish to read more on Kotha and prostitution in Punjab? I have been working on Punjabi
at this moment, I cannot suggest you because not much work has been done and I may not be knowing. But the idea, some of the idea I got was from Radhika Kapuria's book. And I will send you the reference to Satish Sharma, and then I think he will send you, or you will manage, right? In chat.
Sir, I feel she's trying to talk about gender in akharas, if I'm getting her right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
also,
yeah. Yeah,
uh,
earlier period, Khadas did not have women, but then in 80s, there were women. That is what I was emphasizing. That with the coming of first women and then the women participating, there were a large number of women singers in Khada. They would be, in fact, it was always be a jodi, not couple, but together they would be singing. So, Gurdas Man, in all probability, uh, yeah. So I have got one question. No, it is not only Khadas, if you see, but it became a norm later on that singer and a woman along with him. And you look at how Diljit Dosanjh, was dressed in his Melbourne show recently, or Sydney show. He was having traditional Punjabi dress. And the person who dominantly demolished this kind of dressing was Sidhu Moosewala. Most of the songs Sidhu Moosewala sang, he was wearing jeans. Earlier songs may have some otherwise this is what he did. And but otherwise, and he never had any dancers. He himself would move arms and all that, and song became great, super hit rather. And largely Gurdas Man also was dressed like this. If you look at the earlier singers, Lal Chand Jamrajat used to wear that traditional Punjabi dress. Asa Singh Vastana didn't do it. He had kurta and pajama, and even Sindar Kaur didn't have. So Muhammad Sadiq again had traditional Punjabi dress, but women may not be having. They would be dressed well, but not any fancy dress. Because salwar kameez, which basically is not a traditional Punjabi dress, but it is regarded as Punjabi dress. This is how it used to be. Yeah.
I think there are no more
Okay.
questions in the chat box. Thank you so much, Professor Paramjit Judge. Now I'll tell Professor Sandali to give us the vote of thanks and to wrap up the session.
Thank you, Ankita. Thank you, Professor Judge, for taking us through this deeply layered journey of performance music from from embodied spaces like Akharha to the mediated worlds of the screen and videography. So you've shown this transition extremely in a very interesting way, where the technological intervention that happened in musical traditions is not just technological, but how it's social in its very essence, and how it has involved the shifts in audience. Earlier, for instance, you talked about how akharas were community, in face-to-face performances where there was a element of intimacy with the audience. The audience would surround the akharas singers. The question of identity, and how this shift has also meant a change in the very meaning of performance. For me, the question of authenticity was also interesting, because my work is in that area. The question of authenticity: what is Punjabi music, for instance? And the way you have historically traced Punjabi music from the time of, the Marathi singers, the religious singers, the conjures who were singing in the kotas, patronized by and in the earlier context, to the videography and the involvement of mafia, the kind of economy of scale that this kind of a new contemporary musical tradition is seeing. So that kind of movement is telling us a lot about the movement of the social in Punjab and the larger Punjabi diaspora as well. Uh, and of course, coming back to the question of appropriation, you've talked about how in earlier times the folk singers were not known. Nobody was known as, this particular music is by a particular kind of a singer. But once the cassette culture comes in, once the recording begins, then a particular singer is attributed the authorship for a particular kind of song. So I think this is something which I believe we all of us can relate to in our own context, in our own local traditions. And in many ways, what you have described echoes very similar transformations in other folk and community art forms, where visibility, which has happened in the visual economy, how it definitely brings recognition. You can now see the face of a particular musical tradition, but it also raises new kinds of hierarchies, new kinds of exclusions. Um, I mean, I grew up in Patna, and I have seen Gurdas Man come and sing in near Patna Sahib, or even in the concerts in Patna. And I used to be fascinated by the kind of energy and by the kind of music that he brought in his wake. And Dalit Mehendi also is somebody I've grown up with. But the new kind of music that you're describing, the kind of music that is informed by the Punjabi diaspora, and the involvement of market of this scale, is something which is fascinating, but at the same time also very worrisome. So you have linked it with the questions of land ownership, the historical identity of the Jats, and how that has informed the ideas of Jat masculinity, and how that has entered into the vocabulary of this kind of music. But it is something which is worrisome. I mean, for instance, when Sidhu Musawala, of course, he's very different from many others, but he talks about Jatada Mukabla, or Karan Aujla, for instance, talks about how his kurta is all laden in blood, and a particular, and there is a lot of, one sees that there's a lot of rivalry, there's a lot of one-upmanship um, around the whole question of masculinity. Of course, you've talked about it historically, you've also traced it back to the Veer Ras, and how violence was glorified even earlier in particular kind of traditions. But it's interesting to see how that tradition is getting, finding more and more space, instead of the other, softer, more romantic kind of traditions that one knows, Punjab, one kind of identifies Punjab with, for instance, Heer Ranjha and others. So, and of course, Sidhu Moosewala's case was a very interesting case, in the sense that he's a very different kind of a singer than many others, and yet you see that space uh, is laden with guns and that kind of particular kind of masculine vocabulary. So now, thank you so much for your talk. But I thought that I will save my question for the end, because I had been asked to try and wrap up this long and very layered presentation. So my question was around, and you don't have to answer if we don't have the time, but I just wanted to raise two questions around caste and gender. That one is that one sees in the new kind of music, one sees women as not having a lot of role. I mean, apart from, of course, the objectified images of women, which we keep seeing in not just in Punjabi music. That's something which is happening across. But they don't have any particular kind of agency, especially in the kind of music that you have talked about. Where is the woman singer? You do, although, see people like Ginni Mahi or Rooplal Dheer coming up with this very interesting alternative genre which is being called the chamar pop, and how they are bringing in the whole Ambedkarite assertion within music, and there are lyrics where the man is saying that I'm going to go to college and only study, and I'm not going to milao aankh with any of the women. And there is a sense of looking at educate, organize, agitate, Ambedkar's clarion call as this space for assertion of Dalit identity and for
Yeah, we can now wind up, and I just would like to make one small comment on what, in fact, just to sum up, see, through his presentation, Professor Judge has combined the ancient and the modern, and therefore it covers a journey or a kind of evolution of, uh, uh, folk. And but at the same time, we must also know that in the larger Indian context, if we go back to the times of Bharata Muni and Avinav Gupta and all that, so they developed a theory of rasa. Now, which was a kind of performance which was conveyed, which carried a lot of meaning, conveyed through gestures and language and in a particular form. And that's what visual sociology tries to deal with. This is one part of that. The second is that he talked about eroticism and other things. And visuals do have not only that erotic dimension, but they can also be uh, kind of making expressions. They can also be kind of making pathetic expressions, some kind of aggression, furiousness. So all kind of things can be therefore visible through visual medium. And in his talk, Professor Paramjit has very, I mean, in a very, very simple manner, explained how the things which one could not previously imagine, the things which one could not be previously imagining, now they can be imagined through this journey of visual of folk culture. This is what I would like to say here and finish. Organization and particularly to Professor Vaishali and the young scholar Ankita, and also the later Sandali Thakur. I mean, they have excellently done their job, summing up and also pressing vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.